objectives and standards of Clause 55 of the scheme. And appropriate conditions have also been imposed to ensure compliance. In particular, I draw your attention to Condition 1A, where we propose to remove the roof terrace in Column 1. Condition 1C and D, we are seeking compliance with Standard B17, which refers to side and setbacks, in addition to B19, which refers to daylight to existing windows. Further to that, Condition 1E and F have been imposed, and that condition specifically requires that the dwelling at the rear of the site be provided increased setbacks, in particular next to the immediate neighbour's property. Councillors, we're recommending the application be supported with the conditions noted in the agenda.
Thank you. I have Natasha Potentio on behalf of the applicant listed to speak. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Just would like to say we have the officer's report. It's a very detailed report and consent to the condition.
Could you just pull the microphone over closer to you so everyone? That's okay.
We actually do agree with the conditions that have been imposed with the notice of position, in particular to protect the amenity of the occupants to the west by the increased setbacks for Unit 3, also the removal of the terrace for dwelling 1, the increased setbacks at ground Hollywood and the increased setbacks at first Hollywood. So we actually have no problem with that. The only condition we do have a problem with, and I think that could be addressed or could be compromised, is condition B. Floor to ceiling heights, clearly noted on elevation for all dwellings, floor to ceiling heights must not be greater than 2.7 metres. Now, and then condition C also relates to side and rear setbacks. So we're essentially saying we're prepared to comply with the side and rear setbacks, provided that we can keep the floor to ceiling heights as we've got on the plans, which will address the side and rear setback issue, but also internally the ceilings won't be so low as the condition imposes.
Okay. Is there anything further? No? Okay, thank you. You can return to your seat in the gallery. Thank you. I have 2 groups of objectors listed to speak. So there is Anne Sanson and William Foddy. Yes, would you like to come forward? Yes. And then there's also another objector registered, so you get 5 minutes in total, so you'll have 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
So can I take less time and give the other person more time?
Yes, you can. Sure. It's usually the other way around.
Yes, so thanks for this opportunity. So I'm and my partner from 17 Hartington Street, which is directly opposite this proposed development. Our main concern was the roof terrace. We're very pleased to see that Council has recommended and the developers have agreed to get rid of that roof terrace, which would have overlooked all the adjoining properties. But I'd also like to note that the report is inaccurate in some respects. It talks about brick veneer houses surrounding the property. In fact, there's one brick veneer house in that stretch of Hartington Street adjoining the property. The rest are heritage listed, weatherboard houses. So I do think this development is very much out of keeping, being 2 stories rather than single-storied, taking up such a large proportion of the footprint. I think there are about 3 trees shown on the plans. The statement earlier about it being traditional in appearance and form, I think is stretching things a lot as far as I'm concerned. It is quite out of keeping. We're not against there being medium density development, but 3 2-storey houses in this small space we think is overdoing it. And I'd like to save the rest of my time for the second objector.
Thank you. So the second objector I have listed is Thesis McLean. Thank you.
Okay, I'll condense this as much as I can because I have a number of queries, but we'll keep it short because I completely support the notion. The adjoining houses are not weatherboard, they are Edwardian villas and they are character houses. There is a heritage overlay on them. I appreciate there's no heritage overlay on the proposed development, but it directly abuts 3 heritage houses and is very close to the rear of those houses and is going to definitely affect the immunity of the residents living in that house, or those houses, I beg your pardon. So the first thing I want to talk about is an additional 16 people, 6 vehicles or thereabouts are using a cobble paved laneway. This is a right of way that was designed for removing excrement. It wasn't designed as a street. There's no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that noise levels will increase dramatically by vehicles using that street and also by having such large buildings in close proximity to our living areas. It's not a side development, it's a front to rear development. And I consider the inclusion of the laneway to be not really fair to us. We don't have a view, we're not arguing for one, but the siting of building number 3 directly behind number 19 will completely obliterate our outlook. We won't be able to see any sky. I've already done measurements on this. So I'm not asking for a view, I just want to have a piece of sky, if that would be all right. So we propose a more sympathetic development, would be keeping, even just moving the carports to one side and allowing us to see to the side. This is also actually alleviates the problem with driving in the laneway because it is an extremely narrow laneway. We've already had several vehicles hit our rear roller door. This is going to increase that. So if they put slipways to one side, that's something, but really the buildings are far too large for a development and totally out of character. Totally out of character with the buildings thereabouts. I think how much time have I used?
You've got 1 minute and 15 seconds left.
I've got 1 minute 15. Oh, I might just say a bit more too. No, I think I'll leave it at that. I'll speak. I consider it an overdevelopment. I'm surprised that the site coverage was passed because from what I read, the standard A5 and B8 specifies that all covered outbuildings should be taken into account, and I suspect that to final coverage would be over 60% if that was. But that's the planner, I'm not arguing with the planner. So, thank you. I would recommend that the buildings be reduced to one level. If that doesn't happen, then change the design to something a bit more appropriate, similar to what you've got in Thornbury, which would allow us to have less imposing, in-your-face buildings only 9 metres from our rear window. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have questions? Councillor McCarthy.
The second objector
you can take the seat. Thanks.
Raised a question in relation to the calculation of site coverage. Could we just get a bit more officer comment on that, please?
Councillors, the officer assessing the application has noted that site coverage is at 53.8%. So they've undertaken the calculation and derived that proportion.
So probably just to clarify, and thank you for that, I do see that in the report. It's probably more in relation to the calculation given the outbuildings and whether the outbuildings have been included or not included. I think the intimation by the objector was the outbuildings hadn't been included in that calculation.
So the outbuildings that we would be referring to are the carport structures, the dwellings themselves. Items such as solar tanks and storage units would not normally be included in that site coverage calculation.
But if I'm correct, the carports have been included in that.
Councillor Greco.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, I'd just like to get some clarification about it was mentioned about the heritage overlay over some of the properties that are close to the particular land in question. I just want to get some confirmation from our officers what the actual situation is.
Councillors, in relation to heritage, the site is not covered by a heritage overlay. There are sites nearby that are. The fact that this site isn't covered means it doesn't fall under the ambit of the heritage controls that apply to those that are covered. The neighbourhood character provisions of the planning scheme do apply, and the application has been assessed against those.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Amir.
Through you, Mayor Lassurf, I was wondering if we get some comment on the issue raised by the objector about laneway access and the appropriateness of that.
Yep.
Yes, councillors. Sites that have a right-of-way buffer are normally sought after by developers for obvious reasons. It provides an additional access point, which basically means you utilise less of your site, which also means more provision for dwelling footprint, open space, etc. The right-of-way appears as an above-on title, which basically means that development in this instance can utilise it as proposed. It is a bluestone right-of-way. It's considered constructed by council standards, and therefore the applicants have the right to utilise it for access purposes. When we assess an application such as this, we need to ensure that appropriate manoeuvrability is available so that vehicles can enter the carports and exit in a forwards direction out onto the main road. So it's a legitimate proposal to utilise the right-of-way, councillors.
Thank you. Any other questions? You have a question? Councillor Newton?
No, sorry.
Actually,
no, you don't.
No questions.
if I may,
Councillor McCarthy.
it's just if I can just get a little bit more comment from officers in relation to the non-compliance with standard 55.02-5B5 integration with street. If you're able to expand a little bit more on beyond what's in the report, if that's okay.
Certainly, Councillor. I might refer you to the elevation drawings provided in the agenda. Our main concern related to the presentation of the first floor to the street. The ensuite on the first floor is provided with a blank wall. We are suggesting that that fenestration be introduced into that component so it presents better to the street. Where possible, we try to avoid blank walls on the faces to the street.
Thank you.
Thanks. Would anyone like to move a motion?
Yes, I'd like to move to support the officer's recommendation with the conditions.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Amir. Councillor Newton, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, so while I acknowledge the objector's concerns, I think this is a reasonable development for the site. I think 3 on the block is okay. I think that they're separate. I think that they're 4-bedroom houses in a desirable area. It's right next to the train station. I don't think we can deny that, and that it mainly complies with the criteria. I'm pleased to see that the roof terrace is being removed. I think that's a good modification, and I just think that these will be good family houses that people will really like to live in, and I don't think that we can deny that.
Thank you. Councillor Amir.
This is a development which I agree with the objectors is not consistent with the houses in the area, both in terms of the architectural style and density, but from reading the officers' reports and what we heard tonight, I don't believe we have strong enough legislative grounds to refuse.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, I will be speaking against this application. I think from what I've heard tonight, I think the heritage issues are of significance, and when I look at the overhead shot, I don't see any along that street there, apart from 1 or 2 sections on the end of the street where there are multiple dwellings on the site. I think in terms of keeping with the general feel and respecting the neighbourhood of the street. I think that's a very key point. Given that the land, it's only just over 500 square metres, I think it'll be more suited to a dual occupancy, and I think that you'll get a better design outcome, particularly with the laneway, and I think a dual occupancy on that site will be much more consistent with the existing development there, given that in that area there are a lot of homes that have a heritage overlay. So on that basis, I know that in terms of neighbourhood character, I know that's a very nebulous issue, but I think there are strong grounds to reject this application on neighbourhood character grounds.
Thank you. Any further speakers? No? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That's carried. So the planning committee has decided to issue a notice of decision to grant this planning application. The applicant has 60 days to appeal this decision, and the objector has 21. So both the applicant and the objectors will be notified in the next week of this decision. Moving on to 5.2, application for a planning permit at 376 Plenty Road, Preston.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This application seeks approval to develop 5 three-storey dwellings, all contain 2 bedrooms. There are 5 car parking spaces in the form of a single garage for each of the 5 dwellings. Vehicle access is via Plenty Road. I should start, Madam Mayor, in this instance, this application is not subject to objections. There was one received that's been withdrawn. So the decision we sought tonight is either a permit issued or refusal of the application. The application seeks a waiver of the visitor car parking space, which is required as a single space for every 5 dwellings. The application is on site that is included in Amendment C 137, which has been awaiting approval since December 2015. The matter is referred to this committee because when Council adopted the planning scheme amendment, it adopted it with a 30-degree setback for the properties. The application complies with the 45-degree setback, which was consistent at the time with the exhibited version of the planning scheme amendment and later endorsed by the panel. I should specify, and there's some commentary in the report that has given you some guidance on why the office is recommending supporting this instance and the challenge that this situation poses for VCAT, where you've got a planning scheme amendment to a large part that is seriously entertained, yet there are aspects of it that are uncertain. It's that uncertain aspect in relation to the rear setback and what the Minister may ultimately support that presents a challenge in this instance. There's been a few cases where people have ruled on both Amendment C136, which is approved and in place for St George's Road, where there are variations in what the proposal before the Council was, and that in relation to the adopted document. And what the tribunal said was where there's consistency all along, you can treat it as a seriously entertained proposal. Where there's not, there's doubt, and we need to defer to the existing planning scheme. So that's the reason for the recommendation and the difference with the adopted form by Council, and that's why it's been in the committee tonight for consideration of the recommendation of support.
Thank you. I have Gianni Mancuso registered to speak on behalf of the applicant.
That's Frank, actually.
Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
I'll keep it brief, but in essence, the report stipulates in terms of everything that we've sort of tried to put together. I suppose it's more about the purpose of the zone and what we're trying to do and the corridor that the property sits itself in. So we've tried to put a development together that actually has a good amenity, meets what the zone is seeking, and to concentrate development along the rail corridor there. So, and as Darren has stated there is, we work quite closely in trying to provide a reasonable setback to the rear, and it's within the 45 degrees, but yet also the development itself has a good articulation. We've tried to keep the material palette in a form that is long-lasting and very minimal in terms of render. So the development has a lot of effort put into it with all those requirements. So the report before you, I think, describes in a very considered way of what we're trying to do, and the recommendation with its conditions is supported by ourselves, and we're not going to challenge any of the conditions. So therefore, we respectfully request that the decision is upheld. Thank you.
Thank you. You can take your seat. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor McCarthy?
Just a clarification. There was one objection received, and that's now been withdrawn. Could we get any information as to the grounds upon which it was withdrawn?
I'm not sure, but if it is withdrawn, it has to be withdrawn in writing, and that has occurred. Okay. Now, the details in the objection are quite familiar to other councillors who runs a pro forma for it.
Okay, thank you. That satisfies my question.
Thank you. Councillor Rennie, did you have a question?
No, I was happy to move a motion in support of the officer's recommendation that we grant a planning permit.
Thank you. Did anyone have any other questions first? No? Thank you, Councillor Rennie. And you're happy to second Councillor Newton. Councillor Rennie.
Yes, I think we do know that we are going to see these kind of developments along Plenty Road, and I think it's very telling, in fact, that we no longer have any objections and did only have one. In many ways, this is quite a modest proposal for Plenty Road. We know that many of the developments go much higher, and in some ways, having this development on the site may actually protect the site from much greater development in the future. So I do think there is demand for these kind of dwellings. I think that they offer good access to the transport corridor, and that is supported by the planning scheme. It seems to me we have no grounds on which to refuse this, and I believe we should grant the planning permit tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Newton.
Yeah, just following on from Councillor Rennie, I think this one's all right. I know we're in a bit of a funny situation here, sort of in between the zones, but this will be rezoned as residential growth zone. It's on Plenty Road. What's going to happen is that there will be a maximum of 6 stories here, and this one's 3, so I think it's okay.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
I'll also support this, and I'll just draw to councillors' attention on page 31 the analysis of the site coverage and the permeability of this site, which is specified in the DDO. This development actually comes in under what is allowable, which is actually pleasing to see. So there will be more permeable surface on this site, despite the fact that it's an apartment block, and also the site coverage is about 7% less than what the developer could have accessed. So it's good to see design which doesn't seek to fill the full envelope.
Thank you. Further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Moving on to item 5.3, application for a planning permit at 2 Clark Street Reservoir.
Thank you, councillors. This is an application for 2 dwellings on site known as 2 Clark Street Reservoir. I might begin with a little bit of background. An application for 8 dwellings was proposed for the site this site plus the adjoining site, 2 to 4 Clark Street. It was refused by our planning committee, and the decision was affirmed by VCAT. Now, the application is for 2 attached double-storey medium-density dwellings. Each dwelling is provided with tandem double garaging, 3 bedrooms, front and rear private open space. The dwellings have a traditional form. The proposal has been advertised in the normal fashion, and as a result of that process, 8 objections have been received from the community. The objections are summarised at page 43 of the agenda. Councillors, our assessment of this application is that the application is supportable subject to conditions, as the project displays a high level of compliance with the planning controls. In particular areas where there isn't compliance, so for example street setback, in the report we've identified why the setback is appropriate and satisfactory. There's also an area of non-compliance relating to standard B14 access. That will require some modification to the width of the proposed crossovers to the site. There's also non-compliance with shadow cast from this development to the developments, to the development to the south, and in particular the private open space of that dwelling. We propose via condition, and in particular condition 1A, that the building setbacks of the proposed dwelling next to that open space be modified to comply with the standard. Councillors, we propose that the application be supported. That is a notice of decision to issue with conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. May I call on Pauline Maltzis to speak on behalf of the applicant? Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, I'd like to begin with the background, and it was touched on, it wasn't in the report. I'll just reiterate, there was a previous double-storey dwelling development over the 2 blocks. It was refused by councillors and VCAT with office a recommendation to that committee meeting for approval. I'd just like to point out one thing in that regard, is that my client advises me that Mr Tamaccio, who the objector speaking here tonight, he was also the party to that VCAT hearing and did raise similar concerns as raised with his application to that proposal. And I'm further advised that he did indicate at that hearing that he would be possibly happier with a 2 to 3 dwelling development on one of the blocks, which this proposal does at the lower end of 2 dwellings. Upon my review of the site and surrounds, I do consider this to be a development that sits very comfortably within its surrounds. Both family homes with generous rear yards in excess of 70 square metres each, as you can see, so there is plenty of space for landscaping around the site. There is full compliance with RES code achieved, subject to the conditions mentioned by the council officers, and that includes reducing the crossover width and other modifications necessary to comply with overshadowing. The proposal also complies with council neighbourhood character policy in full, and I would point out that attached building forms are a part of the character of this particular part of the street. To the south there are 4 attached dwellings, a fairly recent development or double storey, and opposite the side there is also a family development. In relation to the front setback, it was noted that there is non-compliance with RES code. I would beg to differ. I believe it does comply based on the adjoining setbacks, and therefore there should be, I would just like to point that out, it complies, and obviously the officers can answer any questions related to that. 8 objections have been received. I'd like to point out that 7 of those are identical, and none of those 7 are immediately adjoining the site, and 2 are in fact located in the street behind the subject site. I don't believe those in particular can demonstrate any impact on those properties. The only abutting objector is that to the south of 50 Howard Street, overshadowing and overlooking or complying The circulated plan shows their two-storey outbuilding, which will block a significant part of their views to the site. One of the concerns they point out is the visual bulk. I believe it's appropriate, although the client is prepared to consider some options if councillors consider that to be an outstanding issue. With respect to traffic and parking issues, Council's Traffic Engineer Department and Planning Officer agree the proposal is acceptable in relation to these issues and there is full compliance with Clause 5206 and Rest Code in that regard. In conclusion, I do believe the owner deserves recognition of his review of the site following Council's and VCAT's previous determination. This proposal is significantly downscaled from the previous application and there would be no planning grounds to not support the proposal based on relevant legislation and policy. And I just have one query regarding the proposed conditions relating to condition 1D. It refers to provision of retractable, adjustable louvers facing east on all east-facing windows. Just wanted to point out that the east-facing living room windows are covered with a veranda, so I don't see that as being necessary on those rounded windows. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have Tony Tomacio registered to speak on as an objector.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. I've just got some photos and things that I'd like to circulate.
That's okay. Jacinta will hand them around to us.
Thank you in advance for taking time to read and listen to my concerns. I appreciate it. One big key on this is the plans do not illustrate the pool located at the rear of 50 Harold Street. Even though every other feature, including the garage and the bowler are, this area is very bright and sensitive space and the mission as such is very concerning. This is the second time it's been omitted. I raised this concern in the first instance with the early application, and again when this application was issued, we came to Mr. Gavin Crawford, and he advised me that we look into it and take this into account by viewing aerial shots of the area. That may be fine, but how does it take into account if it's not actually on the development plans, and how do others know what the impact's going to be? I again question whether this has occurred, as this is a very private and sensitive open space and it alarms me greatly. The sensitivity of this area, which is utilised by my family for 6+ months per year, needs absolute privacy protection so we can continue to enjoy it as it has been. Overlooking concerns, obviously, more screening required to ensure absolute privacy, possibly achieved with increased setbacks, repositioning of windows or changing dwelling configurations. The visual bulk of this development, whilst it's improved from the previous one, I don't believe that it has addressed all of the impacts in the backyard realm. So whilst it has over the whole site, but I think the backyard realms are still affected by this. In addition, when you couple that with what's occurred to the west of my property on the corner there of Howard Street Park, the full development, the impact on the existing neighbourhood character is extreme. The loss of the on-street car parking, this development will cause the loss of two on-street car parks. Again, when this is coupled with the previous development, it brings a total to 5, all over a 40-metre span. Again, the number of crossovers being 2 for this development, whilst it numerically complies, I question whether there's a need for 2 crossovers. Again, when it's coupled with the previous development, it brings a total of crossovers to 5 when there was previously 2. So again, the interaction between pedestrians and vehicles causes a bit of concern for the existing residents and myself. In summary, I believe that this proposal, whilst it's improved on the previous proposed development, I believe with a few minor changes, that would actually assist in improving the visual bulk, the overlooking, the overshadowing concerns, and further protecting the existing neighbourhood character, especially in the backyard area. So basically what I'm asking is that if the committee could consider a deferral on any decision until the mediation meeting could be held between all parties, including the developer, council planning department and myself, as I feel that we're close to achieving a good result for all parties and hope to avoid the need for further delay and additional costs to the parties. So I'm seeking that, whilst it's an improvement on the previous development, I still believe that some of the standards are basically being met just by numeric base, not with what's there and what the existing neighbourhood character in the area is. And the impact on the pool area, which is a private and sensitive open space, which my children are worried about, utilising going forward, considering that they are scarcely dressed in that area with their friends. I have concerns that the windows that are facing that area, whilst they might meet standards, I think there's greater protection needed so that we don't have to be further impacted in utilising that space. Again, I question why the pool is not depicted on the plans. It concerns me greatly. I thank you for your time and hope we can come to a great resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor McCarthy.
Firstly, if we could just get some comment from officers in relation to the reasoning for not including the pool in the consideration, just because it was raised a few times.
Yes, councillors. As you all know, we don't draft the plans, the designers do, the applicants do. What we require of them is that they show a abutting secluded open space. They have done that. Should they have shown more, it would have assisted, but in terms of our merits assessment of the application, it is not required. It is considered secluded open space whether there is a pool there or not. The officer will have calculated the shadow cast of the proposed development onto the secluded open space and has made particular mention of the potential impact of that shadow onto the secluded open space of number 2C Clark Street. In other words, we are satisfied that the development meets the numerical requirements of the Clause 55 standards regarding shadow cast from the development onto the objective's property in this instance. So they don't have to show the pool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor McCarthy.
Second question, just if we can get an indication as to where we are within the statutory time frame as well, please.
We're outside the time frame.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Amin.
Can I ask for, it's simply speculation, but around any visibility from the new development into the Howard Street residence? So looking at the plans, it seems like the pool would not be visible from ground level because of the high fence, 1.9 metres. And on the second floor, from the plans, it looks like there are no windows in the bedroom 3, which is the closest room. There is a window for the bathroom. Would it be possible for someone in that bathroom to see into the pool area at the Howard Street site?
Councillor, before answering that question, I might just talk about how the controls were developed. The controls are developed to prevent someone from having outlook from a habitable room, and by that I mean a bedroom, a lounge room, a kitchen, not a bathroom. So in the first instance, no treatment is required to bathroom windows. Now, applicants and neighbours do negotiate and mediate for different treatments. I would suggest that as officers we shouldn't encourage that because it's not required by the rules. So it would be difficult to view out from the. Sorry, you were referring to the bathroom window.
Upstairs. Yeah.
It would be difficult very difficult to have outlook into the neighbour's property from that window. But as I said earlier, it's not habitable and it doesn't have to be treated anyway.
I was going to...
Councillor Messina, do you have questions?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Would the developers entertain a highlight window in the bathroom? In place of this particular window?
I'm not sure, councillors.
The question is, could there be a condition put on?
It could. I'd suggest, as I mentioned earlier, we're going beyond the planning controls when we seek that kind of change, but it could be imposed, it could be challenged as well.
Councillor Greco?
Yeah, look, I just had a couple of questions. One is that I just want to understand a little bit better the condition 1A in relation to the overshadowing. And I understand that our office has made reference to that, but what would be the implications of the setback in relation to the development?
What may be required to occur in this instance to meet the requirements of the standard, there might need to be the walls of the development sited away from the boundary, overall height of the walls reduced. The applicants would need to demonstrate to us that they comply with that particular planning control. So it will necessitate changes to the proposed development. The difficulty here is the neighbours' open space linked to 2C Clark Street is sandwiched in between a two-storey development to one side and a two-storey development to the other. It already is impacted by shadow, and the development proposed here to the north may create further shadow, and we believe that the neighbour should be protected and therefore we impose that condition.
Okay. If I could ask a further question, just in relation to the screening that was also mentioned, I just want to get some clear understandings that whether we've maximised the potential to screen off the development from overlooking in relation to.
Sorry, I'm not understanding your question, Councillor.
I'll rephrase it, because there are issues about overlooking, raised by the objector, and I just want to understand whether the screening that we have already suggested as part of the conditions and whether they are adequate or whether they can be further maximised.
Councillors, from a planning perspective, I believe the conditions are adequate. It achieves what the planning control requires. Anything beyond that goes beyond the planning control.
Can I also draw your councillor's attention to the bedroom window that is overlooking is actually obscured glazing. It is already
The bathroom window?
that's opaque glazing and then obscured glazing.
Yep.
On the bedroom window.
Oh,
They all have the obscure glazing to a height of 1.7 mil from ground level, which basically means you have to step on a box or a chair to have outlook. And the whole idea with overlooking is to prevent unreasonable overlooking. It doesn't anticipate people standing on objects to peer out of windows.
Yep.
Councillor Rennie?
if councillors have no further questions, I was happy to move a recommendation in support of the officer's recommendation that we grant notice of decision to grant the permit.
Thank you.
I've got a question.
Councillor Newton has a question. We might just take that question.
Yeah, just briefly for you, Melissa. I'd like some clarity around condition 1D, which the applicant mentioned in terms of the veranda on the ground floor. Can I please get some clarity around 1D?
Okay. So the condition refers to external operable shading devices excluding roller shutters to all east and west facing habitable room windows and glazed doors.
Yes, I think the question is whether it's necessary on the ground floor.
Councillors, it may assist. Is it absolutely necessary? Maybe not. Not on the ground floor because there is that area that overhangs, as in the roof component. So not absolutely necessary to the ground floor east facing windows.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, Councillor McCarthy, do you have a question?
Oh, I was happy to second.
Happy to second, okay. So we have a mover and a seconder, so Councillor Rennie, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Lasser. I feel it's reasonable to support the application here for a planning permit. I note that this applicant has previously tried to present something much more ambitious in terms of 4 units on this and 4 on the adjoining block. VCAT has refused that planning permit, and they have listened to the advice and decision of VCAT, which was that the block is suitable for development, and they've come back not with 3, which they might have done, but with 2 on this block. And they are 2 houses which I think will meet a housing demand in the area. They are generously sized dwellings. There are many things about them that I think are actually very good compared to much of the developments that we see. Notably, they've got bedrooms that are a really good size with great amenity, additional lounge and living spaces, and I think they will attract people to this area who will live in this area, who will become part of the community in a very positive way. And so I think that we do know there is demand for quality houses in the area, for quality family homes, and I think these are quality family homes. I do understand that this will be a shift for the objector, and I recognise that that's not easy to see your neighbourhood changing. I believe that there won't be overlooking issues. I've spent a lot of time looking at these plans. I'm not concerned about the bathroom. Nobody wants to build a bathroom where people can see them sitting on the toilet or sitting in the bath. I'm pretty confident that, you know, they want an outcome that protects their privacy as much as the objector does. So, having said that, I very much thank the objector for coming along and sharing his perspective with us. Those perspectives are very important as we go through the process of making decisions, but I cannot see any grounds on which we can reasonably reject this planning permit, and I therefore will be voting in favour of it.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
I think Councillor Rennie has quite eloquently set out the key arguments here. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that we do not have the capacity to defer this at this stage. We are outside the statutory time frame. It's why I asked the question. Were there still time to look at this, then I would have considered that seriously based on the very reasonable request that the objector made. Were we to not make a decision, then the applicant would have every reason to go to VCAT on the basis of failure to decide. I think it's unfortunate that the various variations and compromises that the objector sought to achieve haven't been achieved, but having seen the previous incarnation of this proposal, this is a marked improvement, and I would second Councillor Rennie's analysis that there really isn't a grounds upon which to refuse this application. On that basis, I'm inclined to support it.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, I was wondering whether the mover and the second would entertain a small amendment, and I don't have the exact wording, but it would be to the effect of providing some additional screening in relation to the bathroom window, in order to protect both the new inhabitants of the development, and also in relation to the objector's concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I believe that we've heard that this window will be frosted, which effectively means that there won't be any capacity to view out of this window. Can I seek clarification that the bathroom window is a frosted window? That was not my understanding, if it is. Yeah.
Officers, could you clarify?
Yeah.
It's up to 1,700 millimetres.
Sorry?
The screening or the obscurity is up to 1,700 millimetres, and there was a crosswind where it's clear.
Just to clarify, that's the screening, what, external screening?
No, it's
the glass itself.
Sorry, we'll just hear from the officers, councillors.
Fixed obscurity on glazing.
Councillor Greco, I believe that the fixed obscure glazing satisfies the need for privacy and screening. I think that once we start to enter into the realm of what happens if people stand on boxes to peer into other people's yards, we're outside the realm.
Sorry, we're heading back into the debate now. I think that Councillor Rennie is not happy to change the motion that she's put. I think that's what we're hearing.
Yep.
Yes. Are there any further speakers? If not, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT, and the applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Moving on to item 5.4, application for a planning permit at 416 St George's Road, Thornbury. Officers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Unlike the previous item, this site is through the Minister's office. It is an approved site. It has a military height of 5 stories. In this instance, the proposal is for 4 stories, containing 9 dwellings and a ground floor shop, which has an area of 90 square metres. The 9 dwellings include 7 2-bedroom dwellings and there are 2 single-bedroom dwellings. The 9 car parking spaces are provided in the form of stackers, and it's important to note that access to this site is via St George's Road. Unlike other locations along St George's Road, there is no rear lane. The application seeks approval, therefore, to reduce parking for the shop and visitor parking. And as set out on page 69, that's equivalent to 4 spaces. The application has been advertised with 8 objections received. The grounds of objection and the officer's response are outlined on pages 59 through to 62. The proposal, as I mentioned, is located in the St George's Road corridor. It's identified along with other transport corridors as an area where increased residential development, and in particular it supports housing above commercial uses where the zone is commercial, as it is in this case. Accordingly, the application is recommended for approval or support with the issue of a notice of decision subject to conditions outlined in the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Matt Dobson registered to speak on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you, councillors. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm the Director of Multiply Town Planning. I'm representing the owner, Dulcie Rodriguez, who's here tonight, and I'm a proud member of the Planning Institute of Australia. I'm hoping to use my 5 minutes pretty effectively by asking 5 questions. Question 1, and I'll answer the questions. Question 1, does Council's policy support a 4-storey mixed-use building in this location? I say yes. The site is within the St George's Road corridor and within the commercial zone. And the commercial zone seeks to create vibrant mixed-use centres with higher residential density. It's a short walk to Thornbury Primary, a very short walk to Thornbury train station, Northcote High School's down the bike path and the train corridor, Melbourne Polytechnic and Preston Markets about 1.5 kilometres in the other direction. It's an area blessed by transport and services. Council's housing policy at Clause 2103 identifies that the site's in a substantial change area, where increased residential densities and increased housing diversity is expected. The policy intention is that the character of these areas will change substantially in the future. And as discussed in the planning officer's report, the proposal is consistent with this policy intent. Council conducted extensive public consultation to develop the St George's Road corridor plan, which was then introduced into the planning scheme last year as design and development overlay 16. The DDO 16 guides the scale of new buildings along the corridor and indicates that this strip in between Hutton Street and Normanby Avenue will develop very differently from how it is now. Council's vision is for a bustling row of shop fronts with apartments above. The proposed building provides a 90 square metre shop chamber with 9 apartments above, so it's an excellent fit with that strategy. The building complies with all the elements of the DDO 16. It's a well-designed mixed-use building that has an active frontage and is modestly scaled. It's essentially a child of the DCO 16. We sat down with council officers before the overlay was introduced, and then worked backwards from the building and what the DDO is headed towards at that stage. It's 1 story lower than the 5-story height limit, and there's no variation to the building envelope that the DDO provides. And the building, so as a result of that, the building steps away from the residential area of the rear as it rises. Question 3. Will on-site amenity be acceptable for future residents? Yes. The building was designed using the Moreland Council Apartment Design Code, which predates the Better Apartment Design Guidelines, and has been really great tool for the architect and myself in developing great internal amenity. Light wells, apartment sizes, balcony sizes, bike parking, storage areas and waste management have been designed to meet or exceed the Moreland Apartment Design Code. And as a result, the building provides excellent amenity. Question 4, are off-site impacts acceptable? I say yes. The site's located on a busy road in a commercial zone next door to a service station with a tram corridor out front. So it's a pretty robust environment. The light ports provided on each side of the building are generously sized and ensure future equitable development of both neighbouring sites. The rear and north side balconies are screened to 1.7 high as a result of the conditional permit, so that there will be absolutely zero overlooking possible to neighbouring sites. ESD measures include recycling of the building materials of the brick house that will be demolished. There's a communal solar PV system required on the roof as a condition of permit, which we're happy with. The windows are double glazed. There's 9 bike racks, 1 for each apartment, and it's carefully considered water sensitive urban design. Question 5, what about the objections? The closest objection came from 81 Hutton Street, whose backyard abuts the rear boundary of the site.
20 seconds.
The owner raised concerns about overlooking. The condition requiring screening obviates any overlooking that may be possible. The next closest objection is from a resident at 66 Hutton Street, Harold Street, which is about 130 metres away. The building has been thoughtfully designed to make a strong contribution to the developing streetscape.
Thank you.
I think it's important to say that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll call on Kathy Dodson to speak as an objector. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for listening tonight. My principal concern about the proposed development is the application for waivers on planning requirements for parking applications. I believe if the waivers were to be granted, I think there'll be a significant and quite negative impact on the amenity of the area. Because it will only add to the existing quite high demand for on-street parking in the local streets surrounding the development. Harold Street, which is my street, is the first side street to the south of the proposed development, and I think it'll bear the brunt of this demand because drivers seeking to park at 416 or near 416 St George's Road necessarily travel past the site heading in a southerly direction, coming down St George's Road, and Harold Street is the first place they'll come to. Once they realise they can't park there, they're going to be turning into Harold Street, which is already looking pretty full of cars. It's the very blessings that the developers' representatives mentioned about the school, the train station, the tram stop, etc. That even the service station actually have already placed high demand for on-street parking. The train station is 350 metres away and it doesn't have an official car park, but during the week you are guaranteed to see the surrounding streets completely full of parked cars in what has become a de facto park and ride for train commuters. Thornbury Primary School on Hutton Street is closer to the development. It also brings significant parking demand onto Harold Street. and the other surrounding streets. Hutton Street is a very busy thoroughfare. It already has various time-based parking restrictions on it. Harold Street does not. So people who want all-day parking, including Thornbury Primary staff and parents, come to Harold Street to park. And that includes parents seeking all-day parking to catch the train or tram to work after dropping their children off at the school by car, which is quite a common occurrence. The third key factor is that there are a lot of residents in Harold Street that don't have any parking at all on their properties. Harold Street, between the railway line and St George's Road, has 44 houses on it and 7 sets of units and townhouses already. Those townhouses represent another 45 households. 20, or nearly half the houses, don't have any parking on their property at all. And of the remainder, there are only a small handful that have room for 2 or more cars. Now, we know that about 50% of Australian households have 2 or more cars in them, and predictably, existing Harold Street residents are relying on the on-street parking that's there now for their second car and very often their first car. So I would ask, actually there's one other thing I wanted to mention, which is there's also a church on the next street along, which is Smith Street on the corner of St George's Road and Smith Street, which actually encourages their parishioners to park in Harold Street and also on St George's Road because of the demand that they place, sorry, I lost my words there, but they need parking. Smith Street's full, they're asking their parishioners to park on Harold Street and the other surrounding areas. So there are lots of things that are already making Harold Street very full. It's already a tricky place to park. And I would ask that this development be redesigned so that it can accommodate the planning requirements for parking on the property itself and not place existing more pressure on the people that live in the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor McCarthy.
I just firstly ask to officers, just on page 69 there is a comment that refers to the lack of a parking precinct plan as being part of the rationale for not providing the car parking for the shop component, which of course, as noted, is 3 spaces. Were there to be restricted parking, such as a residential parking scheme on either one or both sides of Harold Street, would officers still be supporting the reduction in parking requirement for the shop component?
Yes, Madam Mayor. There's certainly no precedent set that along St George's Road with a strategic encouragement for commercial developments. The shop's got a footprint of 90 square metres. There is a requirement in the planning scheme for the 3 spaces, but when the empirical data is looked at, or what the traffic engineers typically produce, it wouldn't be that much of a stretch for them to argue successfully in VCAT that there's a legitimate case for no parking for a footprint of that size. But if it was a supermarket, for instance, there'd absolutely have to be an on-site provision. It's too much of an on the nearby streets.
And
thank you.
And thank you. That's helpful. And just in relation to whether a future restricted parking regime were to be introduced into Harold Street, my understanding, based on our policy, is that residents of this apartment block would not be eligible to access those permit parking places. So I suppose that's the first thing, just to assert that. But secondly, given what's been described by the objector, whether there is a reason why there isn't a restricted parking regime in place in Harold Street at the moment, such as residential parking requirements.
Difficult for me to answer why there's not one in place. I'm aware of the parking pressures on the area with the nearby train station. There are restrictions closer to where the train station is, and it does tend to push people further out. It is correct, if council wasn't in mind to introduce a permit system, for instance, into Harold Street, those that are residents in, and if that was done in a year's time, for example, this development happened to be finished, the permit system relates, I think, to a date of 2004, so you had to be in the development prior to that date to get an entitlement to a permit. So if that sort of system is in place, new residents cannot park in that street.
Thank you.
If it's restricted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Would anyone like to move a motion? Councillor Amin?
Happy to move the motion in line with the officer's recommendation to support.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Amir?
So this is a development that I think has responded to what the zoning and the planning is looking for in terms of having a shop on the ground floor and then medium density. They haven't been, from what it looks like on the plans, trying to push the boundaries and find loopholes and find ways around complying, which is sometimes what I feel like we see. In this case, it's been more sensitive. There does seem to be an issue related to the parking, and I'd hope that we could manage that perhaps through permits, looking at what else could be done on the site. But given the need for housing in this area and the good location, the parking consideration doesn't seem to be insurmountable enough to refuse this.
Thank you. Councillor Messina?
I only give a couple of
You can just move your microphone. Sorry, I asked you to move it before because it was
Apologies. I just wanted to highlight that this particular building could have gone to 5 stories, and the developers actually gone down to only 4. They're good sized quality balconies, good sized quality buildings, double glazed windows. I can only support this planning application.
Thank you. Thank you. Further speakers? Councillor McCarthy?
Look, I'll speak in favour of this. Upon consideration of what the zoning and the structural plan for St George's Road allows for and provides for, we do have a building here that is lower than the maximum height limit, 4 versus 5. It also sits within the 45-degree envelope. In fact, it sits a bit less than that, which is good to see because it minimises the impact on adjoining properties. The issue of the car parking, I think, is an interesting one. It's not resolvable in relation to this permit, and that's part of the challenge with this process, is that I can see very strong grounds for an application from the residents in neighbouring Harold Street now to say to council, well, on the basis of if you do support this application, we would like to have restricted residential parking of some form in Harold Street, which would probably deal with some of the other parking pressures on the street as well. And I know Harold Street well, and I know that that is an ongoing issue in a number of those streets. So I think the residents in the street would have a very strong argument on that basis, particularly given that we are going to see an increase here. So what that looks like remains to be seen. There is a process, and I'm sure officers can provide that to the residents interested. The reality is, though, that if this were to be refused tonight and were to go to VCAT, it would be passed. I have no question there that it would be passed. I'm actually surprised that the developer has put in the full 9 spots for the residents, because we often see a reduction in the parking provision with these sorts of developments, and in fact, in some cases, in fact, where stackers are included, a common series of parking spots is also included. So we have the full contingent, we just don't have the visitor spot and the shop spots, and that's pretty common with these sorts of applications. So on that basis, I'm inclined to support it because it could have been much, much worse.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, I'm speaking in favour of this application. I think it merits support. And when we unpack the parking situation, if we have a look at what the parking reduction is, it's 4 under the standard, but 3 of them are for the shop, and 1 is only for visitor car parking. So given that the nature of the street, it's a transport corridor where you expect development, that's where we want development to occur. And I think a 5-storey development on that site is quite respectful in relation to the nature of the site. And as the other Councillor McCarthy has said and other councillors have said, I think we need to separate the parking issue of the residents in Harold Street, and there are other avenues to address that, and of seeking a parking management plan for that particular street, and also for that area there, because I think in future we are going to see much more development along St George's Road, and we're going to have the same issue of the implications that it has for the streets that abut to, or the streets that cut into St George's Road. But I think we need to separate the parking management issue from the development issue. So I think this application warrants support.
Thank you. Any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal. The applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Moving on to item 5.5, application for a planning permit at 95 to 99 Plenty Road, Preston. Officers.
Thank you, councillors. The proposal in this instance for 95 to 99 Plenty Road, Preston, is to demolish the existing building and to construct a 6-storey mixed-use development with basement level car parking. 15 dwellings are proposed. 10 of the dwellings are 1 or 2 bedroom, with the remaining 5 having 3 bedrooms. 2 shops are proposed on the ground floor that could be converted into one larger shop if desired. Pedestrian access to the shop and dwelling is from Plenty Road. Vehicle access is from the abutting constructed right-of-way that runs north-south from Wakeman Street to Junction Street. The maximum height of the development is 19.68 metres from natural ground level. Car parking is provided in the basement with pits created for car parking stackers. The applicant is proposing 27 car parking spaces for the development. In this instance, councillors, the application has been advertised, attracting 10 objections from the local community, and the objections are summarised at page 80 and 81 of the agenda. Councillors, amongst the plethora of planning controls, the proposal has been assessed against the proposed planning control DD03, which was adopted by council and formed part of Amendment C137. Planning control is a seriously entertained planning proposal. More relevant to applications for mixed use, multi-level developments along Plenty Road, the Plenty Road corridor and the junction. The amendment is currently with the Minister for approval. It is our view that the proposal satisfies the relevant components of the control, and I'll touch on those components. On the site has a frontage width of 22.74 metres, which is over the minimum block frontage of 15 metres. The control envisages development of up to 6 storeys, which translates to 20 metres, so that's what's allowed under the proposed control. The development is proposing a total height of 19.68 metres. With regard to setbacks, the control encourages 0 setbacks to the frontage for the first 4 levels. However, as the site is covered by a heritage overlay and acknowledging the Victorian terraces to the north and south of the site, which are also within a heritage overlay, 0 setback has been provided for the ground floor level, and balconies and architectural treatments projecting to the front boundary at 1st and 2nd floor. So in that instance, even though the control allows sheer 4 levels to the boundary, acknowledging that the site is in a heritage overlay and we do have heritage buildings to the north and south, we are of the opinion that the applicant has come up with a good solution in this instance. Apartments 1.5 and 1.6 do not comply with the first floor setback requirements at the rear of the site. The setback of these dwellings are to be increased in accordance with condition 1F to comply. The rear walls of the development comply with the 45-degree angle setback measured from the boundary of the residential property to the west. The building mass of the development is directed to Plenty Road. Ground floor heights ensure use by a variety of commercial properties. A variety of residential Diversity is provided, 1, 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings. The proposal installs high quality external materials. Services and car parking spaces are provided to the rear and not visible from Plenty Road. A continuous street edge is provided. Weather protection in the form of a canopy is proposed. Active retail frontage is proposed to Plenty Road. And the residential area entry is identifiable to Plenty Road and does not dominate. Council is taking into account as I mentioned, the plethora of controls and the proposed control, which is seriously entertained. The development achieves a high level of compliance, and we're of the opinion that it should be supported subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. May I call on Mark Stanojevic, sorry if I got that wrong, to speak on behalf of the applicant.
Madam Mayor and councillors, thanks for the opportunity to address you this evening. This application dates back beyond 12 months. There was a fair degree of pre-application discussion with the planning office. And I think it's fair to say that the intention throughout that early period and for the majority of this journey in the application period has been to work within some key parameters, those being the heritage overlay and consideration for Heritage Place. The proposed and now adopted DDO 3 being for 6 storeys and 20 metres. Concealing the car parking off the rear being a laneway access opportunity, and in turn providing for long-term parking, which then of course means that in a commercial zone we can retain an active retail frontage at ground, which is critical in a centre like this. So our view, looking back over that process, has been this project is a great example of collaboration with the planning office and various internal departments to reach what we think is the correct outcome as recommended by the planning officer, including the conditions as recommended. It's a modern 6-storey, 19.68 metre high building, and critically, it's in an activity centre, a transport corridor, a substantial housing change area. It's got all of these strategic attributes that make it perfect for this location, and it does exactly what this council's adopted DDO 3 requirements suggest in terms of desired building envelopes and height. It's the perfect place to put height when you look at it on a broader perspective across the entire municipality. So yes, this council policy does encourage urban intensification, but at the same time, the other factor to consider has been the heritage place and how we handle the front facade in particular, and that treatment has been carefully handled through both independent heritage advice along the way and also peer review by council's own heritage advisor to reach the point where we're at today with the recommended conditions. We also note that it provides for a diversity in dwelling types, 1, 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings, which we think is an important factor, maintaining also at ground the active retail frontage and the parking at the rear. As I alluded to before, the aim has been to maintain long-term parking for residents and retail use on the site. The parking provision for residents is 24 car spaces for occupants, as distinct from the minimum 20 that the planning scheme specifies. So we're providing access for resident car parking, and the shorter term parking for visitors is provided comfortably based on street surveys. We also provide 14 bike spaces on site. As I've noted, throughout the process there's been considerable work, particularly with the Heritage Department, to reach the point where we're at. I also note in the officer's report that there is conclusive support from internal departments, and I note that particularly from the parking and transport management side of the process, strategic planning being in an appropriate location, heritage and of course ESD. So I conclude by saying we agree with the recommended conditions of support, and we'll say that is because it's based on a very thorough assessment by the planning officer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll move the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie.
I'd like to move a motion in support of the council officer's recommendation, but with an addition, and I'll just get that up. So that condition relates to the rear laneway, which in its current state is really unsuitable to be the primary vehicle entrance for the number of cars that will be using this building. So I propose that we accept the officer's recommendation but add to condition 1 an additional 1H to require the construction of the rear laneway to the satisfaction of the responsible authority at the cost of the developer from the southern point of the subject land through to Junction Street, and a new condition at 25 to read as follows: that the developer prepare plans and fund the full cost of the reconstruction of the rear laneway to the satisfaction of the responsible authority, with the works extending from the southern end of the property northward to the access point with Junction Street. Such works would be to be completed prior to the development being occupied and finished to the written satisfaction of the responsible authority.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that?
Could we just get a response from the officers in relation to the wording of that additional point? Just
I think the officers provided that wording.
Yep, that's correct. Yep. All right. I'm willing to support that.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes. Look, I've spoken out in this chamber on a number of occasions against developments that might on the face of it look similar to this. Things that have been 6, 7, 8, even 12 stories. And I've spoken out loudly, and I've spoken out against those developments because the quality of the amenity and the build that they proposed was really poor. I understand that residents in this area are concerned about 6 stories, but the zone here allows and encourages 6 stories. Having said that, I've been looking closely at the height of buildings and how 6 stories presents to the street. And the 6th story of this development is the top level of a 2-story penthouse. It's a very small footprint at that 6th level, and equally at the 5th level, also quite a small footprint, which is half the penthouse and 1 other unit. So this is not a great mass of building going up to 6 levels. This is a development, I think, that is responsive to the site. It is on Plenty Road. We may or may not feel that 6 stories is appropriate on this location, but 6 stories is definitely allowable. That is not a point that we are going to be able to argue anywhere. And on a positive note, these are some of the finest apartments that I've seen come before us in this planning meeting. And I think that that's very important because we don't want to end up with a town which is divided between poor quality apartments and lovely houses beyond the main streets. We actually want quality housing to be delivered not only in detached homes in quiet streets. We want quality housing to be delivered in apartments. We want to be able to offer this. And I think that some of these dwellings, you know, there's a real mix of dwellings in this building, which I think we know is that dwelling diversity is very good. It creates more healthy communities. And I think that these dwellings will be highly sought after. I think people will want to move into this neighbourhood. The current buildings that are on this site are not attractive and add very little to the neighbourhood. I actually think there's significant potential for this to add to the neighbourhood. Having said that, a building such as this deserves better than a rickety, cobbled, old laneway full of weeds. And I don't think that it should be for council to have to front that kind of access. You know, the rear is going to be access to this development for everyone who lives there. They deserve better, and I think it's incumbent upon the developer to ensure that occurs, and that's why I've added that condition in respect to the rear laneway.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy?
Thank you, Councillor Rennie, for putting it so eloquently. I've really struggled with this one, and the reason being is that we have an interesting situation where the planning scheme amendment that this council, well not this council but the previous term of council approved, which I wasn't supportive of 6 stories on this site, but it is actually what the position is that the council had taken to the minister. It is very much the position that the independent planning panel had supported, and certainly, despite my view and the view of some others, was the position that finally was adopted by the council. It is the position which would be upheld at VCAT. And I suppose in terms of considering whether to support this or not, it was actually Councillor Rennie's analysis of this which probably swayed me in relation to how this will actually present from the street, how this will in fact present, and I'll draw councillors to the streetscape view where there is considerable setback from street, which is interesting at the frontage. It's not all a sheer wall at the front, which I'm pleased to see. It is a more interesting design than what we often have presented to us, and certainly at the rear, and councillors would see the setback at the rear. There is obviously an attempt there to comply with the planning scheme requirements. So it is a tricky one for us to consider because it is very much the realisation of what that planning scheme amendment was designed to do, which was to limit the size and scope of development and ideally, where possible, to minimise the impact on adjoining properties. It is not an attractive site at the moment. That does not necessarily guarantee that it should be redeveloped, but if you're going to put something there, you'd like to see that it's going to be an improvement to the streetscape. I also would make the point that directly opposite from this site, Council and then VCAT refused an application at the corner of Flett Street, and I think that was the right decision, but this is a different decision for this side of the street and a different context we now find ourselves in.
Thank you. Further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. The decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Item 5.6, application for a planning permit at 19 Rayleigh Street, Thornbury. Officers.
Thank you, councillors. This is an application for a medium density development for 5 dwellings abutting a council reserve known as Harry Reserve. Each dwelling has 2 bedrooms. Dwelling 1 to 4 is reverse living, whilst dwelling 5 has a conventional layout that is a living zone downstairs, bedrooms upstairs, and open space at grade. The dwellings have a traditional residential appearance. The pedestrian path separates the development from the reserve. A single vehicular access point is provided to the site from Raleigh Street. The proposal has been advertised, and as a result of that advertising, 27 objections have been received, including a petition with 59 signatures. The grounds of objection are summarised at page 110 of the agenda. Councillors, our assessment of this application shows that the development achieves a high degree of compliance with planning controls. And for that reason, we are recommending that the application should be supported with conditions. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you. I have 2 applicants registered to speak. I'm assuming, will you be speaking separately? Daniel DeFazio. So you each have 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Is Ben Hardwick here?
He's an objector.
Oh, I've got you listed as the applicant. You've got 5 minutes.
Good evening, councillors. This proposal seeks to modestly increase the density of housing with well-considered and composed dwellings in an area highly suited to such an increase. It's well located as it abuts a public reserve. It's on a large lot that is well located as it's very proximal to the High Street activity area. It is well located as it's approximately 500 metres from the Thornbury train station, approximately 100 metres to the High Street tram lines, and then it's nearby the St George's Road cycling path, about 750 metres away. On those last points, Plan Melbourne expressly desires these 20-minute neighbourhoods, which this site would really seek to meet. The 20-minute neighbourhood lets you walk cycle, or public transport to most of your daily needs. And the location of train station, tram, cycling paths and high street activity area, that's exactly the sort of 20-minute neighbourhood. It's placed within the general residential zone, which has a purpose of encouraging a diversity of housing types and housing growth, particularly in locations offering good access to services and transport. While still achieving the overarching desires of the general residential zone and Darebin's housing policy at clause 2103, it's still highly compliant with the neighbourhood precinct guidelines, this one being C2. Specifically in regards to the housing policy, the proposal responds to the need for additional dwellings due to an increasing population, the need for a diversity of housing options, and the need to increase the number of dwellings along transport corridors. Broadly, the proposal has dwelling 1 fronting Raleigh Street with habitable rooms at its balcony facing either the street or reserve, or both. Dwellings 2 to 4 predominantly address the reserve and the private shared pathway along that same boundary. And dwelling 5 is composed to have its living area on the ground floor with access to a ground floor courtyard. 4 of the dwellings offer 1 ground floor bedroom and 1 dwelling offers a ground floor living and outdoor space. So this provides for a diversity of options within the same development for prospective occupants. All dwellings take advantage of the adjacent reserve while seeking to activate that space more. This is due to dwellings 2 to 5 specifically addressing the reserve, and dwellings 2 to 4 having their living and outdoor areas facing the reserve. In return, the reserve will be more activated through casual surveillance by the dwelling occupants, as well as its likely increased utilisation by said occupants due to its convenience. Overall, the composition strongly meets clause 5503-6, which is the open space objective. The request for waiver of the 1 required visitor space has been appropriately justified in the supplied car parking demand assessment, which is undertaken by a consultant, and also supported by Council's Traffic Management and Planning Unit. It is acknowledged that there were a large number of objections. As such, the offer of a consultation meeting with all objectors was initiated by us after the planning department here were unable to. However, there was no uptake by any objectors and the meeting was cancelled. To conclude, this has been a highly consultative process that has seen the proposal orient the driveway on the east side rather than the west, has seen assessment and consideration of neighbouring trees, including 2 significant trees in the reserve nearest the site, and has seen the street-facing elevation tweaked to ensure it complements the streetscape. Through this process, we have earned the support of the Planning Department and trust their expert recommendation will be upheld. Thanks.
Thank you. I have 3 objectors registered to speak, so you each have 1 minute and 40 seconds. So there's Ben Hardwick, Catherine Garrett and Peter Gonis. Gonis, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I want to address 3 issues tonight. Firstly, the parking waiver, neighbourhood character, and thirdly, I just wanted to address, I guess, the tone of the discussions tonight. Most of these applications have been in commercial areas, there have been substantial change areas. This is a materially different application. It's in an incremental change area. And our promise to the Commission is that this development goes too far. It's not a moderate development. It's not consistent with the housing strategy. And I think that there's been a lot of confidence in the statements that have been made tonight about what VCAT will decide. I actually don't think that you can have the same level of confidence about how VCAT will approach this. And we know from 2015 where a similar application went before VCAT. And one of the critical findings the member made was that if you're going to have a housing strategy and you're going to have substantial change areas and you're going to have incremental change areas, there has to be a difference. Okay, so this area is admittedly close to a substantial change area, but when you turn out High Street, that's the point. It changes. It goes from substantial to incremental. So when you put 5 double-storey townhouses in that area, it does change the character of the area. In particular, I want to address the fact that if anyone has been to this part of Thornbury recently, you'll notice a whole series of multi-storey developments in and around that whole cafe strip. So there's Short Round, there's a lot of cafes there, there's Sirakos, and I understand that there's a major application for a development of the corner of Clarendon High Street. Now, if that goes through, the parking situation in that whole area clustered around Sirakos is going to be a nightmare. So at the moment, there's already an overflow of parking from Sirakos. Sirakos car park is always filled. There are a number of people...
Thank you, that's the end of your time, that's 1 minute 40. Sorry. It does go very quickly.
Yes, we're all on the same team. I think that the ultimate submission is that the developer needs to come back and negotiate. I accept that there's going to be some development on this site, but I think to not force them into a proper negotiation would be unreasonable.
Thank you. Can you just pause that? Anyway, encourage the objectors, to, I guess, to take up different points so that you're using your time well.
Well, is my time starting now? Hello, thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to say, as someone living on the street, just painting a little bit of a picture as well, following on from Ben and hopefully being a little different. We have Chrysalida, a family women's health centre, and 2 childcare centres within a quarter of a block of where this 5-storey, 2-level development is happening. There is 1 house on there at the moment. There are 3 to 4 disabled parking spaces around Chrysalida and the Women's Health Centre and the childcare centres, as there should be. So at that end of the street, where this development is proposed, with possibly at least 10 other people coming in and out all the time, and no visitor car spaces, and all disabled parking, there will be no space for parks. At the moment, most of the houses in this block, my own included, do not have off-street parking. We do have residential permits. We still can't get parks outside our house at the moment. So we have real concerns about that in terms of the stress on the street. We're having to park over St David's Road regularly now. Is that enough time? I want Pete to have some, but that is a real issue, that even with the permit parking, we can't get parks. The Cerankis traffic is enormous, and I would take umbrage with the fact that this area is not being developed. It's huge developments, and I understand that it is an attractive place and there are, transport options there. The development above Cerankis markets is astronomical, and that traffic as well. Raleigh Street is already a thoroughfare with no speed bumps. It's going to be even worse. Thank you.
I've been a long-time resident of Raleigh Street, and my parents live at 25, which is the property directly next door to the proposed development, and who are likely to most directly be affected by the proposed development. Now, we consider the number of objections to be a significant number and represents the strong objection and sentiment of the residents and community against this proposed development. The main reasons as to why the residents object include, but are not limited to, the following. The proposed development is not in keeping with the character of the street and surrounding properties, as there are no other multi-storey and multi-dwelling properties on any other parcel of land within the block of Raleigh Street between High Street and St David Streets where the proposed development is located. The proposed development represents an overdevelopment of the land and is unprecedented in our block of Raleigh Street, where no other similar type or style of development exists. The proposed development would significantly impact upon the availability of parking within the street, which is already compromised. Further to the development, from my parents' point of view, increased noise and activity will replace the relatively quiet and peaceful environment that currently exists and they are accustomed to. The reason for this is that the driveway of the proposed development, with the single car garages for each of the 5 dwellings, is to be located on the western side of my parents' property rather than the western side of the proposed development site, where the driveway and garage of the existing property are currently located. The increased noise and activity would be from cars going in and out of the driveway, the garage doors going up and down from time to time, and the residents going to and from their cars. The proposed development in the shadow of the course will significantly reduce the natural light from entering my parents' kitchen window, which is currently unobstructed. In concluding, I'd like to reiterate the strong objection to this proposed development that has been made by the residents, and also make mention of the fact that this sentiment is echoed by the residents within the community and neighbourhood. A clear example of this is Cameron Street, between St David and Wild Street, where if you take a drive, you will see many of the houses on either side of the road have signs or placards on them expressing their opposition and objection to multi-storey and multi-dwelling development
Thank
in
you.
the area.
That's it. Thank you. You got a lot in there in that one. Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor McCarthy.
Oh, I just wanted to congratulate all 3 objectors for their brevity and pace. It's very impressive. So, I just wanted to check with officers, just in relation to this area. There was a couple of references made by objectors to the incremental change zoning of the area. In relation to this site in particular, the council has had a couple of goes at looking at what should be the appropriate zoning for these types of sites. Have we been consistent in terms of incremental change, or have we looked at other zoning options in the past? I'm just trying to understand whether there is a disparity between what we've put forward and what the department and minister have approved in the past.
Thank you, Madam
Yeah, it's a good question because if you look at the area of photography and you go up and down the streets, there's quite considerable change occurring in the streets to the north and the south, but not in this street. It's certainly my observations, and with the broad brush way that the new zones had to be introduced and the speed and the haste they were introduced at, it didn't allow that sort of detail where you could pick one street block that's isolated and everywhere around it's developed out as a neighbourhood residential zone if it wasn't already in a heritage overlay.
Yep.
Council had a lot of difficulty as it was trying to advocate what it ended up with 11% and we were seeking 36%. This location was not in one of those areas nominated for the neighbourhood residential zone. But it's a moot point now because the statement's changed with all the gardening area, which applies from the 13th of April onwards, not to the application before you.
Thank you. That probably answers my second question, so I appreciate the thorough answer.
Thank you. Any further questions?
May I just quickly ask you, Madam Mayor, the size of the allocated block, please? The square metres.
What's the size of the block?
Yeah.
The site has a site area of 705 square metres, Councillor.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Rennie.
No, I would like to move a motion that Council refuse the application with a number of grounds. I have sent those around, but because we don't have the screen in operation, I would propose to actually read them, and I'll make that as quick as I can. I think it's not fair to others to actually not understand why I'm recommending that we refuse to grant a planning permit in this case. So the proposal does not meet objectives of clause 55 of the Darebin planning scheme as follows. The proposal does not comply with clause 55.02.1 of the scheme, neighbourhood character. The proposal does not respect the existing neighbourhood character due to the following: visual dominance of streetscape, limited landscaping to side and rear setbacks. B, the proposal does not satisfactorily respect the adjoining public open space at 12 Gooch Street and does not comply with clause 55.036 of the scheme, open space. C, the proposal does not provide satisfactory visual surveillance of the internal accessway and does not comply with clause 55.037 of the scheme, which is safety. D, the proposal does not provide landscaping that respects the landscape character of the neighbourhood and does not comply with clause 55.038 of the scheme, landscaping. E, the proposal does not provide for the needs of people with limited mobility and does not comply with 55.051 of the scheme, accessibility. F, the proposal provides unsatisfactory private open space for the reasonable recreation and service needs of residents, and a reverse living arrangement is not suitable in the context of the area. The proposal does not comply with 55.054 of the scheme, private open space. G, the proposal does not provide facade articulation and built form that respects the existing neighbourhood character and does not comply with 55.061 of the scheme, design detail. Point 2, the proposal does not satisfy neighbourhood character objectives in accordance with clause 2202 of the scheme. A, the proposal fails to improve the garden setting of dwellings, and B, the proposal fails to contribute positively to the streetscape. 3, the proposal represents an overdevelopment of the site, and 4, the development does not comply with the state planning policy framework, local planning policy framework and the municipal strategic statement as contained in the scheme.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Lasserf. I'm very familiar with this location, and I would agree that this is completely out of keeping with Raleigh Street. Mr Rudd has actually identified that there's very little development of this kind in Raleigh Street. It's a very intact street, and I think this is just reaching way too far in this location. 5 units is stretching things a bit, and I think it is incompatible. I don't think these units offer something that can't be achieved somewhere else in many of the apartments in those sort of growth zone areas that we've looked at, where this type of development is more encouraged. And I do acknowledge the likely issues with parking in this location. It is a street that is extremely difficult to park in for some of those reasons that objectors have mentioned. So I really don't think this is supportable in this location. I know we've seen similar things elsewhere, but it would be quite at odds with the other houses in the street and the general character. It's just simply squashing too much in.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you to Councillor Rennie for that very thorough motion, and I just wanted to second this also on the basis that from a purely neighbourhood character perspective, this one fails. And it's actually rare that you can say that, because neighbourhood character is often a nebulous thing, but it fails on so many fronts. And it does remind me of an application which we did refuse relatively recently, which was on Miller Street in Thornbury on the other side of St George's Road, similar, adjoining a sort of a laneway, walkway, open space area. And that's a much more significant road than Rayleigh Street. So on that basis, I'm very supportive of Councillor Rennie's refusal. I would also note, though, that the reality here, and I think Mr Rudd made the point, is that there really should be greater protection for a street like Rayleigh Street. It is rare to have an intact street in the way that it is, and mostly intact. And this might be a point for council to take up more generally at the strategic level. The other thing to say is that there is scope for redevelopment of some of these sorts of sites, but not like this. And I think that the community understands the need for densification in some places, but not when we're talking about 5 lots on a site like this. This is not the right location for this development, and it certainly doesn't warrant an approval at this stage, or in fact in the future. So I'm very supportive of Councillor Rennie's refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, I'm very supportive of the alternative motion. I think looking at this, the thing that struck me was the heart of the issue here is the neighbourhood character of the in relation to the particular street there. If you look at the overhead shots, the street is fairly intact, and I think a development of this nature will completely disrupt the overall feel and lining of the street in terms of the dwellings that are there. I think it's really an overreach by the developer in trying to put 5 on that particular site. As it was mentioned, it's only just over 700 square metres, and to have 5 dwellings on 700 square metres in a particular area like that, I think it really is an overreach. I think it's just trying to take advantage of the open space that's there in front of it. So on that basis, principally on the basis of being out of step with the neighbourhood character, I think this clearly fails that test.
Thank you. Any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to refuse this planning permit. The applicant has 60 days to appeal this decision to VCAT. Notices detailing tonight's decision and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant over the next week. Moving on to item 5.7, application for a planning permit at 22 Ross Street, Northcote. Officers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is an application that seeks approval for a 3-storey apartment-style development, plus a basement. I'll explain the context later on in this introduction. The proposal includes 9 dwellings that are made up of 3 single dwellings, bedroom dwellings, 5 2-bedroom dwellings, and there's 1 3-bedroom dwelling which sits on the top 3rd storey. 11 car parking spaces are proposed in the basement in addition to 13 bike spaces. The open spaces provide in a combination of forms, courtyards for the ground floor, dwellings, and then balconies for those that sit on the upper levels. This site is included in the General Residential Zone 2. It has an area of 584 square metres. The application has been advertised and reflecting the mixture of dwelling types. There's been a fairly strong response with 42 objections. These are summarised on pages 130 to 132. One of the challenges on its own, clearly I would suggest in this street, the site was sitting on its own, it's not a type of development we want to contemplate. What enables the application to be lodged and considered is the fact that it's nestled between 2 apartment-style, double-storey blocks of flats, and and there've been I think what's persuaded the officer in putting a recommendation of support is that there have been a few decisions from VCAP that have allowed a little bit more to occur on these sites than what would ordinarily be allowed. And probably highlighting how challenging this application has been to consider is that there are quite a few conditions that need to be applied. That in their own do not knock the application out, but collectively show there is the need for improvement. But all told, not sufficient enough for the officer to recommend against the proposal. So the application is recommending full support. And it is understood it is a difficult context, and there were a number of conditions included in that recommendation. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I have no one on behalf of the applicant registered to speak, but there are 2 objectors that are registered. So Lyle Burton, and is Lyle Burton here? Okay. And Michelle Ehlers? Yes. So you each have 2 minutes and 30 seconds to speak. So would you like to come forward and go first?
With current residents in the area finding parking increasingly difficult, it's also become even more difficult to exit the area. It's taken up to 10 to 15 minutes to leave the street of a morning, and there are only 2 exits out of the entire general area. One of the things that came up in 2009 was the fact that there is a safety issue if there was to be an emergency evacuation in the area, and now there's some 60 to 80 more residents since that determination was made. One of the other issues that is raised is the proposal of deep excavation of what we know to be type H soil, which is extremely unstable, and also the possibility of effect on the underground water table from the creek. We'd like to know if the developer would indemnify surrounding properties for the very real potential of structural damage. Given there's no history of this developer that we can find, other than the company was set up in March 2016, what would be the developer's ability to provide restitution for damage? Has an environmental impact investigation report been made? It's unclear to us, other than the financial benefit to the developer, what the benefits are about this proposal to the community and to the environment. And the community and the environment is a very, very strong point to that particular area. It is a very unique, a very, very delicate environment that needs very, very careful consideration to how we develop it and manage it. That particular block we knew was up for development, and we didn't have an overall objection to the property being developed, but we've talked about perhaps something that would be more suitable, like a dual duplex for families to live in, rather than 9 apartments, which seems to be an overdevelopment, not to mention the impact on the street in terms of parking, because every apartment doesn't necessarily have one. They can have visitors. You can't park already to visit my place in Urquhart Street. We have to park on Westgarth Street sometimes.
Thank you. That's the end of your time. Thank you.
Hi, I'm not well prepared, having only received the letter very recently. I endorse everything that the previous objector said, and I would doubly reinforce the idea of the delicate and unique environment. That's a very, very nice and diverse precinct. It's hard to imagine how the apartments on either side of 22 Ross Street, 1B, dreadfully affected by overlooking and sort of overshadowing. I know they can't really be overshadowed on the sort of south side of them, but the impact and the size of it. 9 dwellings, 3 stories on a 580 square metre site just seems to me to be squashing far too much in. The business about excavation and so forth, I guess, is one for the engineers, so I have no great comment about that. My own property, 20 Walker Street, actually abuts it though, and there is a double-storey building there. I guess they're not going to knock it down, and if they do, I guess I'll be indemnified. But I think the real issue is the overcrowding, overshadowing, and I find it hard to imagine how its own open space won't be rather dank and dark. It's hemmed in. It's a hemmed-in site. It just doesn't seem appropriate to me. I do hope council will at least delay making any planning decision and give us a chance to fully investigate it and maybe have a further meeting and conference to see what mitigation of these effects can be. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions?
I'm happy to move a motion at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Would you like to read out the motion?
Yes, I'd like to move a motion to refuse the planning permit. I've got some copies that I can pass around to councillors. There's another
Happy to second the refusal.
It was also circulated, I think.
Yep, there's more for the other side of the room.
And Councillor McCarthy is happy to second. We might just, for the purposes of everyone else in the room, read out the motion.
Certainly. So this is a motion to refuse the application on the grounds as follows. 1. The proposal fails to satisfy the objectives of Clause 2204 neighbourhood character of the Darebin Planning Scheme and the design objective of the Darebin Neighbourhood Character Study and Precinct Guidelines 2007 in terms of visual bulk, height and lack of landscaping opportunities. 2. The proposal does not satisfactorily comply with the standards and objectives of Clause 55 of the Darebin Planning Scheme, in particular. A. Clause 55.021, neighbourhood character. The proposal is inappropriate in terms of visual bulk, height and lack of landscaping. B. Clause 55.022, residential policy. The proposal is contrary to the preferred character of the area. C. Clause 55.025, integration with the street. The height of the front fence provides a poor integration with the street. D. Clause 55.032, building height. The height of the development will result in visual bulk to the street and the adjoining properties. E. Clause 55.033, site coverage. The site coverage exceeds 60% of the site area. F. Clause 55.038, landscaping. Insufficient opportunities within side and rear setbacks to provide landscaping. G. 55.041, side and rear setbacks. Inadequate side setbacks resulting in visual bulk to the neighbouring residential properties. H. Clause 55.045, overshadowing. The development will result in unacceptable overshadowing of neighbouring properties. I. Clause 55.046, overlooking. The screening measures restrict outlook, resulting in a poor level of internal amenity to a selection of the dwellings. J. Clause 55.054, private open space. Poor amenity to balconies and insufficient areas of ground level private open space resulting in substandard amenity. K. Clause 55.055, solar access open space. Apartments fail to achieve this standard resulting in poor level of amenity. L. 55.061, design detail. The design of the development will result in visual bulk to the street and neighbouring property. 3. The proposal is an overdevelopment of the site. 4. The proposed development will result in poor amenity for the residents and is contrary to proper and orderly planning.
Thank you. So Councillor McCarthy has seconded. So would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes. To say that I'm very disappointed that we have received an application of such poor quality and that is so manifestly unsuitable is an understatement. This building fails in just about every standard. Excessive building height, excessive site coverage, inadequate setbacks, excessive walls on boundaries, overlooking problems, problems with private open space, problems with solar access. They may not yet be enacted, but this building would not meet the garden character requirements of the forthcoming scheme. This building would not meet the Better Apartment Guide. There are bedrooms in this development smaller than any I have seen in any of the lousy, crummy apartment buildings that have been presented so far. And quite frankly, that we have a proposal to support this development, I am simply dumbfounded. The fact that our planning scheme has failed to protect communities in the past from the sorts of developments on either side of this block should not in any way and never be used as an excuse to continue to fail to protect this community. In fact, where we failed in the past, and arguably that is the case in this street, we should redouble our efforts to protect those communities in the future, not use that as an excuse for an anything goes kind of approach to planning. So I'm really quite disappointed and upset that a developer would think this was in any way appropriate, and that we would think that because we failed to protect this neighbourhood in the past, we can allow anything now. This is quite a beautiful part of Darebin. It's a small street that runs all the way down to the creek. There's a lot to protect in this area. It is quite close to the creek. It's a very sensitive interface. And we've heard from the objectors that they're not saying nothing is appropriate, but I think we need to look at this street in this context to actually get a sense of what should be encouraged. And that should be something pretty modest, because if ever those developments on either side of this block go down in the future, well, I'd hope that we'd all equally end up with something more modest, not use this, which we could approve but are not going to approve, I hope, today, as an excuse for putting up something equally appropriate next door. And I think there's a general principle there, which is that just because something has been allowed through in the past, just because someone has made a crummy decision in the past, does not mean that we should take that as a guide for our future decision making. So I commend the objectors for coming here today with a willingness to see something, but not this. And I am, as I said, extremely disappointed that we would get something that fails in so many areas to meet the standards.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
What more is there left to say? I think I just would add to emphasise the sensitivity of this street and this site. And if you were ever to pick a part of Darebin where you would expect to see architecturally designed buildings, whether they are apartments or single dwelling houses, whatever it might be, that integrate with the surrounding beautiful environment, that's not what we have in front of us. And in fact, what we have in front of us is something which is well located if it was redesigned in a place well beyond here, but the location is wrong. I think Councillor Rennie's point about the mistakes of the past is pertinent, not just in relation to this, but in relation to so many other applications. And when you have to condition something so much just to get it over the line, that sends a pretty big signal that there's something also wrong with the application in the first instance. So it is a compelling case for refusal, and it has my full support to refuse.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to refuse the planning permit. The applicant has 60 days to appeal this decision to VCAT. Notice detailing tonight's decision and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant over the next week. Item 5.8, application for a planning permit at 38 Jensen Road, Preston. Officers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This application seeks approval for a four-storey apartment development which includes 10 dwellings with 12 car parking spaces. The dwellings are made up of 2 single-bedroom and 8 two-bedroom dwellings. 12 car parking spaces are provided at ground floor underneath where the first floor is located. So It's often referred to as undercroft parking. The open space for each of the dwellings is provided in the form of courtyards for the ground floor, the dwelling on the ground floor, and then balconies for those located on the upper floors. The subject land is zoned residential growth zone and was an integral part of the strategy for the Northland Urban Renewal area. And one of the earlier releases of that initiative expressed through Council's Darebin housing strategy and through the municipal strategic statement being introduced just over 18 months ago. So that area and that rezoning introduced through Amendment C147 contemplates and allows for a minimum or a maximum height of 4 stories. What's important about this particular site is on the doorstep of the Northland Shopping Centre. So it's an area where you certainly would, and the planning scheme is encouraging residential intensification. The site itself has an area of 554 square metres. The application has been advertised. There are 13 objections received. These are summarised and responded to on pages 155 to 162. The report before the committee recommends that the application be supported and that a notice of decision subject to conditions be issued.
Thank you. Can I invite James Livingston to address the committee on behalf of the applicant?
Good evening, councillors. In difference to those applications you've refused tonight, it's not a mid-block location in an established incremental suburb. This is a substantial change site. As Mr. Rudd said, it's in an urban renewal area, language we haven't heard for a long time, to hear the word urban renewal, and it really is on the doorstep of Northland. If you've just taken the chance to look at the aerial photo, you can see that there's a pedestrian path no more than about 100 metres away from the site that takes you straight into Northland. What's more, this is a proposal that ensures that every bedroom gets direct access to daylight because it's a small square site, and so each of those apartments, although not large, has got good internal amenity. Added to that is it doesn't overshadow or overlook anybody. One of the unique features of this site is it's sitting on a corner, and it's on the northwest corner of Hannon Street and Jensen Road, which means that none of the off-site amenity impacts you expect with another site happen here. And we've got to remember those other sites also are in this urban renewal area, so they benefit from the same advantage. This site does, but probably have slightly more constraints. Probably another aspect about the proposals worth noting is that I understand that none of the objectors live directly adjacent to the site, and we're bordered on the north and on the west by 2 sites that wrap around us. So nobody of the 13 objectors abuts our site is in any way directly impacted upon. So we say this is a proposal that makes good sense. It's got a site coverage of 50% in an area where 80% is permitted, not encouraged. It's got a permeability rate of 23% in an area where 10% is considered acceptable. It meets your 45-degree line, and I know the council had a lot of debate over this 45-degree line, and we know the minister didn't give you the mandatory you wanted. He said it's got to be preferred. It meets that preferred guideline in terms of setbacks. And when you think about it, for a site this size to slot in within the 45 degrees, to get 50% site coverage, to get 23% permeability, to have bedrooms all that receive natural daylight, to meet the side and rear setbacks that are required under this zone, we say that's a good achievement. Not only that, the site has an overall height of 12.76 metres. It can go up to 13.5. Car parking is compliant, so there's no waiver or trigger required under the car parking requirements. So, all in all, I'd say this is the kind of proposal that makes my job easier, not as much as some others sometimes, but tonight I'm hoping that you're convinced by the fact that there really isn't any great argument over this site. And we don't take issue with conditions. I've heard the councillor sometimes mention what would happen if we went to VCAT. in my humble opinion, this is a no-brainer. This is a half-day appeal. I wouldn't bother getting experts. It's a pretty straightforward job if we take it to the cave. And I won't even use my 5 minutes. I don't think it's necessary in this instance, unless there's some questions.
Thank you. We'll leave it there. There are 2 objectors registered to speak. Hannah Rehan. Pardon?
Who are neighbours.
Okay. And Antonio Galli. Thank you. Would you like to come forward?
Yes.
Is Hannah Rehan here? No? If not, you've got the full 5 minutes then. Yes.
Okay. I think I'll need less than that. Anyway, good evening everyone. As you know, my name is Antonia and I am a recent resident of Rita Street. I will begin by saying that change and progress is a constant in life and cannot be stopped. Having said that, however, we must be vigilant how change takes place. Does it benefit all or only a few? When planning a development, the displacing of families with children established in local schools and the elderly who need to access local amenities has to be factored in. The problems of housing people and all of its vehicles is not only a local issue, but a worldwide one. Vehicle parking, as we've heard tonight, is especially in a narrow street like mine, poses a big problem. When cars are parked on both sides of the road, I have difficulty going in and out of my driveway, and I have a very small car. Ask any waste collecting driver or large vehicle driver delivering goods how they fare when trying to do their job in that scenario. We tend to be copycats, copying the worldwide trends of creating concrete jungles. And with some of the building structures, you wouldn't even put a battery head in. My question is, why keep following the trends? Why not set the trends? Doing what everybody else is doing is not the solution. Innovation comes when we step outside the box and look at things from a different angle. For instance, spending money on freeways, tunnels, etc. will still be a short-term solution. We must seek to minimise traffic on our congested roads, not increase it. One idea could be to give people free public transport. They would then have the incentive to use their vehicles sparingly if they have one. Also, why not give incentives to industry and people to move into country areas and thus create activity hubs that will revitalise the towns instead of killing them? Very fast trains should be seriously considered. They move people and goods quickly and easily. Undoubtedly, you will say that's all very well, but what about the cost? I think you will agree that governments can be very creative when it comes to raising revenue. and what will actually happen is a redistribution. Visionaries are as important as accountants in the scheme of things. For it has been said that without a vision, the people perish. The win-lose formula is not working. Just a glance at the world situation tells us that we are living in very dangerous times. Everyone knows that the planet is a sphere, not a pyramid.
10 seconds.
Putting in place a win-win formula that ensures everyone benefits from the planet's bounty would remove the discontent that's currently raging.
Thank you.
And greatly
Time's up
assist
now.
in ushering the much needed peace on earth.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any questions? Someone like to move a motion?
I'm happy to move a motion.
Second.
And I'm happy
She was just explaining what motion she's moving.
That's fine. I thought you said move the motion. That's fine.
I am actually going to move a motion that we support
Okay.
this
That's what I thought.
plan.
Would you like to second that, Councillor McCarthy?
I'm happy to support
Thank you. Councillor Rennie.
Yes, look, I wouldn't say this is one that I don't have some concerns about. My concerns do not relate to the height or the appropriateness of something this height and size on this location. My concerns actually relate to the internal amenity of the units, and I've spent a bit of time looking at them, and I've decided that in this location perhaps we will leave it up to the market to determine whether they want tiny bedrooms that I suspect wouldn't meet any kind of standard. And I would actually hope that in the process of moving forward that perhaps the applicant will look at whether a couple of 3-bedroom apartments might sell better than 1-bedroom apartment with a bedroom that doesn't even make 9 metres squared. However, I think there is so much that we actually do want to support in this development that we should let it through. Notably, we've been very clear that we want to build a city in which people don't have to travel by car to get to work, where we get cars off our roads, and where we want to see housing where there is employment. And where is there more employment in our municipality than at Northland, and this building would create housing right where it's probably very needed, and I suspect housing that may be more affordable than some of the housing in the area, perhaps just because some of those units are very small. And so I think, you know, we do imagine that there will be significant growth in this area. We want to see this area grow. We, as a council, have determined that we could do amazing things in the Northland precinct. And perhaps this is the beginning of it. I think it's terrific that the site is right on the edge of the kind of residential area, right next to or just over the road from the shopping centre. It's a good place to start. It sets, I suppose, the tone for what we might expect more of, and I know that that will be a change to a neighbourhood where some people have lived for decades, if not generations. But I think this type of development is really going to lift the whole neighbourhood. So, as I said, I do hope that the applicant will look at the size of some of the bedrooms and the internal amenity offered by some of those units. I think there's a couple that could very easily be combined to produce some really lovely 3-bedroom apartments. If this was 12 stories high, I'd see that as an absolute necessity, that we want to be creating that diversity of housing stock. This is not an absolutely enormous development, and so I think we can let that go and support this application here today.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
I'm pleased that Councillor Rennie was moving the motion that I thought she was going to move, supporting this. And I echo those sentiments. I'd also thank the objector for a very eloquent presentation, and I really appreciate the thinking. And I think the interesting thing about this proposal is that in some respects it provides as housing very closely located to obviously some public transport at Northland, and of course hopefully an increase in public transport in the future. So we are going to need to see how we provide greater housing opportunities in this area, and that's of course something we dealt with in a previous meeting this evening.
It seems that the main thing to know was the parking. Everybody expressed.
Thank you.
And I think just to make the point that one of the things with this application is that there is a market element to this, which is that for someone who is going to be buying into this site, they're going to be having to deal with the reality of where they live and the demand on parking and all those sorts of issues as well. There aren't really grounds to say no to this as well, and I think this is important to realise that it does comply with the structural intent and policy setting that council has in place. And so I think we are obliged to hold true to what that vision is. The vision for the whole NERP precinct is one of highly sustainable buildings and an integrated approach to urban planning. Let's hope that what sits beyond this, particularly to the southwest, so the southeast of this site, reflects that vision in a much greater way.
Thank you. Before I go on, I meant to clarify something that James Livingston said. There was an objector that did that came from an adjoining property. Is that just to clarify?
I didn't.
I thought you said that.
Yes, that's right.
But Mr. Rudd, that's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
Yes. Yep. Are there any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. The decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing tonight's decision and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Moving on to item 5.9, application for a planning permit at 21 Joffrey Street, Reservoir.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This application seeks approval for 3 double-storey dwellings. The dwellings are all proposed to be 3 bedrooms and are provided with 2 car spaces each. And the unusual aspect is they're provided in a stacker format. Open space for each of these dwellings is provided in the form of a conventional ground floor open space in a quantum that complies with the planning scheme. The subject land is zoned General Residential 2 and has an area of 584 square metres. Madam Mayor, this was one of those areas that was subject to somewhat of a challenge. It's identified in the Darebin Housing Strategy, and the report articulates this as an area of low change. It was presented to the Residential Standing Advisory Committee as such, with a recommendation for a neighbourhood residential zone. I still believe to this day, Madam Mayor, that it was an oversight, that it wasn't included in the neighbourhood residential zone. We have this anomaly where the zone reflects the general residential zone, enabling a planning application of this type to be lodged, when the intention strategically was to close the door on this process. The application has, however, been considered on merit and considerable weight being given to the strategic context and what's been said in the housing change framework within the Darebin Housing Strategy. The report sets out a fairly comprehensive assessment against the requirements of Clause 55, which it's required to do, and it concludes that in this location, an application of this type probably isn't as responsive as it needs to be to neighbourhood character and the garden character of the area, and the recommendation of the application for the application is that it be refused, subject to the grounds outlined in the officer's report.
Thank you. I'll invite Natasha Placentio to speak on behalf of the applicant. Welcome back. 2 in 1 night.
Oh no. Thank you very much. I'm just we understand from a strategic position that the application was probably refused because the neighbourhood zone didn't kick in at the time. But in terms of assessment of this application, we feel that it does comply with Clause
55, the standards and the objectives. And perhaps if I take you through it, because I've got the 5 minutes, just let you know how we came up with this concept of the design, because it is a general residential zone. It's 300 metres to the east from the Tyler Street Plenty Road Activity Centre, so it does allow itself to be developed for 3 two-storey townhouses. If I just take you to the aerial photograph, you will see to the south of the site that you already have examples of 3 dwellings extending the length of the block. Also to the south, immediately to the south, we have a dual occupancy development. So in terms of development, this type of development is already occurring in the area. Now the design, if you notice in the actual development plans, you'll see that we maximised its west-east orientation by providing north open space, a vehicle access way along the south elevation. We only have 1 vehicle crossing along the frontage. Normally these types of developments have 2 crossings, one for the first one and then the other ones extend the length of the site. The dwelling one is fully detached along the street interface, so it maintains the rhythm of dwelling spacing along Joffrey Street. The only sections of walls that are built to the boundary is the garage wall of dwelling 1 and section of the wall of dwelling 3 that's built to the west and south boundary. You will note at first floor level all the dwellings are detached. Normally this type of development, like that one in Ross Street, that was completely attached and had some 20 conditions. We're saying that in terms of assessment of this application, it could have been issued with a notice of decision based on the grounds of refusal. Some of the grounds of refusal are very specific, such as increasing the front setback by 140 millimetres. The area where it doesn't comply is for a width of 4 metres. But the remainder of the dwelling does comply with the clause with the relevant standard. That could have been a condition of the permit. It could have been a condition of the permit that the first floor level balconies be removed, because it does provide vertical articulation. It could also have been a condition of the permit that the storage facility for the garage for dwelling 1 be put in the open space, which would make it comply with the actual car space dimensions. So in terms of assessment of the application pursuant to clause 55, we say that it complies with all the objectives and the standards, and it should be supported. It has a site coverage of 46%, where we're allowed 60%. Each open space is in excess of 40 square metres, and it provides a wide number of vehicles that can park on the site, and it provides opportunities for a canopy tree within the front setback. All the first floor level setbacks are well in excess of Res Code requirements, and in terms of from the west, north and south. The garage wall of dwelling 3 could be conditioned if it requires a setback of 1 metre for the north-facing habitable room window. So in terms of assessment and understanding the strategic content of the site, it is what it is now. This is in a general residential zone. We do have multi-dwelling developments in the area, and it does meet all the objectives and standards of clause 55 of Res Code. And unlike all these other developments that were approved subject to conditions, we feel that this development would probably have been the one that should have been conditioned accordingly with minor amendments that we would have been very happy to accept with approval. So, and that's the basis of my submission.
Thank you very much. You can take a seat in the gallery again. Thanks. There are no objectors listed to speak, so do councillors have any questions?
No.
Would anyone like to move a motion? Councillor McCarthy.
Happy to move the refusal.
Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor McCarthy.
I think it's pretty straightforward. We have a practice of supporting officer refusals, and I don't see any reason to vary from that on this case.
Thank you, Councillor Amir.
Just second Councillor McCarthy's comments. I mean, there clearly was some consideration given to the site in terms of having the large setback, detached houses, but certainly the officers believe it's insufficient, then I trust their judgment in this case.
Thank you. Any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to refuse the planning permit. The applicant has 60 days to appeal this decision to VCAT. Notices detailing tonight's decision and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant over the next week. Item 5.10, application for a planning permit at 6 Rosebery Avenue, Preston.
Thank you, councillors. This is an application for a medium density development consisting of 4 double-storey dwellings. Each dwelling has 3 bedrooms and 2 car parking spaces. Two dwellings have vehicle access from Rosebery Avenue, whilst the other 2 from the constructed abutting right-of-way. Pedestrian access for all the dwellings is from Rosebery Avenue. The dwellings are all double-storey and have conventional floor plates. There is living at the ground level with bedroom accommodation at the first floor. The application was advertised in the normal fashion, attracting 10 objections from the community. The objections are summarised on page 210 of the agenda. As can be seen in the report before you, a high degree of compliance is achieved against all the planning controls. For this reason, we are supporting the proposal and recommending the notice of decision be issued with conditions. Councillors in particular, we propose condition 1G and 1H, which request the provision of additional landscaping next to the entries of dwelling 2 and 3. If we believe they lack that landscaping presence and can be achieved by condition.
Thank you. There is no registered speakers for this item, so councillors, do you have any questions? Would anyone like to move a motion?
I'm happy to move a motion to support.
In line with the officer's recommendation? Yep. Thank you, Councillor Amir, and seconded Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Amir.
Not a lot to add. This is a recent development for this site. It's not overly ambitious in terms of the footprint, and it's what we probably consider incremental change, an area that's quite near where we are now, quite close to Plenty Road, and I'm sure will be popular with many.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
I don't have a great deal to add. I think it's pretty straightforward. I just would pick up one minor error in the report. It does refer at one stage to 10 objectors and then 11 objectors, and we can just be consistent on that front. But that's not a reason to say no. So.
Thank you. Any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Moving on to item 6, other business. 6.1, general planning information, scheduled VCAT applications, significant applications and applications for the next Planning Committee meeting. Would someone like to move? Thank you, Councillor Rennie, and Councillor McCarthy second. All those in favour? That's carried. And item 7 is close of meeting. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to patients for staying till the end.